let's talk about wine. And here's what happens here. So some will teach that what you should do today is you should observe the view of total abstinence. And I want to give you 6 scriptural reasons why the total abstinence position is unscriptural. Now, I'm not saying that you have to drink. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is the view that says total abstinence is required is completely unscriptural. And I'll show you why that is. Look with me at Deuteronomy 14. With a lot of the, look at Deuteronomy 14. Deuteronomy 14, verse 22. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field bringeth forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn and of thy wine and of thine oil, and the firstlings of thy herds and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set thy name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thine hand, and shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. But let's make sure we understand what's going on here. There's more than one tithe in the Old Testament. The tithe that's being described there is the festival tithe. So in other words, it's a tithe, it's a tenth of all thine increase, it says there, of seed, of the field that bringeth forth, etc., of corn, wine. And what they do is they would take a tenth of that, or if the place where they were going to observe it was too far away, they'd turn it into money, they'd sell it, and then carry the money with them. But the point is this tithe, this tenth, is used for the purpose of observing the festival. Now notice what verse 26 says. And thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after. See, this tithe is actually a pretty fun tithe. This is essentially a vacation tithe. You take a tenth of it, you're going to go on this vacation, and you know what you're going to do? Whatever it is you want. I mean, isn't that what it says? Whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen or for sheep. In other words, you're going to buy whatever food you want. And then what does it say? Or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desireth. And thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household. Now let me ask you a question. Does the Old Testament law teach total abstinence? It plainly does not. And in fact, verse 26 is written as a command, doesn't it? Thou shalt. Now maybe that offends your religious sensibilities. But God's not going to apologize for offending your religious sensibilities. Isn't that what it says? Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy 16, verse 13. Thou shalt observe the feast of tabernacles 7 days, after that thou hast gathered in thy corn and thy wine. And thou shalt rejoice in thy feast, thou and thy son and thy daughter, and thy manservant and thy maidservant, and the Levite, the stranger and the fatherless and widow that are within thy gates. 7 days shalt thou keep a solemn feast on the Lord thy God in the place which the Lord shall choose, because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thine increase and all the works of thine hands. Therefore thou shalt surely rejoice. So let's go to 1 Timothy 5. Now I want to make an observation while you're turning to 1 Timothy. Typically what happens is the Old Testament is far more stringent than grace, right? So if the Old Testament says, and in fact commands you, to drink wine or strong drink at the festival, what are the odds that total abstinence is the position under grace? Well, let me put it this way. Does the Old Testament law forbid a lot of things that grace doesn't? Yes. Hundreds and hundreds. Right? 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 23. Notice what Paul says to Timothy. Drink no longer water, but use a what? Little wine for thy stomach's sake and thine often infirmities. Paul specifically, therefore, there instructs Timothy to use a little wine. Now, he's not commanding him to be drunk. I don't want to be misunderstood. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is the total abstinence position is not something that is scriptural, and it's more important to be scriptural than to follow man's traditions. Following man's traditions is putting yourself under the religious opinions of men. And that is a mistake to do. Look with me at Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8. And the Lord spake unto Aaron, saying, Do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when ye go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. Now, do you see what that says there? He's saying there to the Aaronic priesthood, don't drink wine or strong drink when you go into the congregation. Right? Well, I'm sorry, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation. Pardon me, I misquoted that. Well, if he's saying there, do not drink wine or strong drink when you go into the tabernacle, what is it implicitly saying? There's other times where they can. That's what it says. Look with me at Ezekiel 44. Ezekiel 44. Ezekiel 44, verse 21. Ezekiel 44, 21. Neither shall any priest drink wine, what does it say? When they enter into the inner court. Well, guess what? Can they drink wine in the outer court? Can they drink wine when they're completely outside of the tabernacle? That's what those verses mean. Now, I realize those verses may be contrary to people's traditions. It may be contrary to what you think is right. Nonetheless, that's what the verses say. Look at Numbers 6. Numbers chapter 6. Numbers 6, verse 2. Starting in verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink. Neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. Number 6 is about someone taking a Nazarite vow. If you take a Nazarite vow, you can't even eat raisins. Right? I don't think you should eat raisins under any circumstance, personally. But that's just me. But then notice verse 20. And the priest shall wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. This is holy for the priest, with the wave breast and heave shoulder. And after that, the Nazarite what? Now, what that verse tells you is that someone under a Nazarite vow, when it concludes, can drink wine. Now, how can anyone have the audacity? The Old Testament does not teach, the law does not teach total abstinence. And that's absolutely, utterly, textually clear. So, are you going to say then that total abstinence is appropriate under grace? Really? The Old Testament restricts, you can't have garments made of diverse substances. Most garments you have are made of more than one type of thread, right? You can read the tag and figure that out. That's a violation of the Old Testament law. The problem with the Old Testament law is not that it doesn't forbid enough things. Right? It doesn't. That's not the issue with it. Well, to come up with the idea that grace requires total abstinence is completely, utterly unscriptural. Look at Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31, verse 6. Now, I'll just say as we look at this, people contort verses and use them to their own devices, and you should always be wary of that. Proverbs 31, verse 6, Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto those that be of heavy hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. The point is there is a use for wine under that economy for that purpose. Finally, get Colossians 2. Colossians 2:16. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in what? Drink. So can someone judge you in drink today? And the answer ought to scripturally be no. Get with me 1 Timothy 3. Actually, get Ephesians 5. there are 7 Pauline verses on wine. We're going to look at all of them. And so we'll see what Paul says on the subject. Ephesians 5:18. And be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. Now, just to state the obvious, if you weren't supposed to drink at all, it wouldn't say, and be not drunk with wine. What would it say? Don't drink at all. But that's not what it says. It says, be not drunk. By the way, when Colossians 2:16 says, let no man judge you in meat or in drink, it's clear that it doesn't contemplate total abstinence. We looked at 1 Timothy 5:23 where it says, use a little wine. Look at 1 Timothy 3:8. 1 Timothy 3, verse 8. Likewise must the deacons be grave, not double-tongued, not given to what? Much wine. Well, you know what not given to much wine refers to? Much. Right? I mean, if words mean anything, the idea there is not given to too much of it. Look at Titus 2. Titus 2, verse 3. The aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine. Now here's what people will say. Get with me. You're in Titus. Get chapter 1, verse 7. For a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine. So sometimes it says much wine, sometimes it only says wine. But notice what it says there. It says given to wine. Well, look at 1 Timothy 3, verse 2. Get 1 Timothy 3, and you've got Titus. Keep Titus and look at 1 Timothy 3, verse 2. 1 Timothy 3, verse 2. Start in verse 1. 1 Timothy 3:1. This is a true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality. Now what I want you to notice there is that phrase, given to hospitality. That is a reference to one of the qualities that's required of a bishop. Now look at Titus. Look at Titus 1. Titus 1, verse 7. For a bishop must be blameless. That's exactly what 1 Timothy 3 said. As the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a what? A lover of hospitality. Titus 1 says a lover of hospitality. 1 Timothy 3, in regard to the bishop, said what? Given to hospitality. So given to hospitality is the same thing as lover of hospitality. So given to wine is the same thing as what? Lover of wine. So what that commandment is referring to when it says given to wine, it's referring to being a lover of it. In other words, giving yourself over to it. It's not just referring to moderate consumption. Look, and I'll prove that to you another way. Get Proverbs 23, verse 2. And put a knife to thy throat, if thou be a man given to appetite. Well, the idea of given to appetite is that you have a strong desire. Every person, in order to live, has to have enough appetite to consume the calories to live. Right? The idea there of given to appetite is that you have some very strong desire. You follow me? So when we're looking at these verses in 1 Timothy and Titus where it talks about given to wine, it's not talking about moderate consumption. It's talking about being given to it. The other wine verse is Romans 14:21 where it talks about, we looked at that in the earlier session, so I won't go there. But here's what I want you to get about the Pauline verses on wine. When we started in Ephesians 5:18 where it says, be not drunk with wine, and then the other verses said, not given to much wine or not given to wine. The issue there is not moderate consumption. The issue there is being drunk or given to too much wine is the idea. It's not a total abstinence position, because if it was a total abstinence position, then all those Old Testament verses didn't go far enough, where they clearly contemplated that people would consume wine and strong drink under the law. Now let me say this before we move on. What happens all the time with people is they interpret the Word of God to their own ends. Okay? So what some people will do, and they'll take this teaching. I'll say, this is great. I can drink as much as I want. I haven't said anything to suggest that. Okay? I've quoted a verse to you that tells you plainly that drunkenness is wrong. I've shown you a verse that says you shouldn't be given to much wine. So, when you teach these things, you can see people about to misuse them and say, well, you said I could do it. And what I just say emphatically is absolutely, utterly not. What I am trying to make clear is you have that scriptural liberty. It exists. The total abstinence position is wrong. It is wrong as a matter of something that can be required. Now, can you choose to do that? Sure, you can choose to. You can choose total abstinence, and I have no problem with that. But what I'm saying is, teaching that as a commandment is absolutely wrong. And you should not let any man judge you in meat or drink. That doesn't free you of or justify your bad choices. See, the whole teaching about liberty is this. You have liberty and therefore are accountable. It's not you have liberty and it doesn't matter. It's you have liberty and you are therefore accountable for what you do. Okay? So don't get all excited and say, this is great. Dave said we can do whatever we want. I am saying the opposite of that. I am saying you have liberty and you are accountable for each and every instance of how you choose to exercise it. All right, very good.